We do have people signed up for public comment. So before we get started with the agenda, we will hear from our guest for the public comment. When I call your name, if you would come to the podium, the public podium, and state your name and then what you want to speak on. We first have Luann Brown, who will be speaking about BL 2025-742, and she opposes the bill.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I respectfully ask for a deferral of this bill. I'm the president of the Richland West End Neighborhood Association. We represent about 600 distinct residences, and we believe that we deserve public engagement on this, where a council member can meet with a group of neighborhood organizations and explain this in detail and how it's going to affect us directly. I would also like to know how the timeline would play out if we were to get a deferral, what would happen exactly by the state, exactly what you think is going to happen. We haven't got any clarity on that yet. There's been a lot of talking around, and I would like a direct timeline of what you believe will happen if we put a deferral in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Craig Patterson speaking on BL 2025-742, and he opposes the legislation.
Thank you. I'm the president of the Whitland Neighborhood Association, similarly about 600 residents, and this proposed bill has probably sparked more interest in our group, in our neighborhood, in opposition, as anything I've seen in the very short period of time I've been here. And very similarly, kind of questioning what the sense of urgency is, because I've written to every one of you on several occasions. I've spoken to the 3 or 4 that have responded to me, and thank you for that. I cornered the vice mayor at a book signing earlier last week and chatted with everybody that I can. And I'm just kind of curious why this thing seems like it's getting ahead of the conversation that should be being had with the neighbors, not just the downtown merchants and tourists. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. That's all I have on the list. Is there anyone else that needed to sign up to speak? Right. With no further person standing up, we will move forward with the agenda. Starting with the consent agenda, I'll read the items on consent, and if anything needs to be pulled off, please let me know before I go through the captions. The consent agenda will consist of starting with item number 3 on your agenda, RS 2025-1070, RS 2025-1071, RS 2025-744, bills on third reading, BL 2024, I'm sorry, that was BL 2025-744. Number 6 is on consent. Number 7, third reading, BL 2024-624 is not on consent, but BL 2024-625 is on consent. So on consent, we have number 8, number 6, number 4, and number 3. Do any of those items need to be pulled off the consent agenda? Right. With no comments on that, we will move forward with the captions. Starting with RS 2025-1070 by Gamble, a resolution authorizing 2317 12th Avenue South LLC to construct, install, and maintain an aerial encroachment at 2317 12th Avenue South. RS 2025-1071 by Coupin and Gamble, a resolution authorizing VC Restaurant LLC to construct and install an aerial encroachment at 300 Commerce Street. BL 2025-744 by Toombs, Porterfield, Gadd, and others, an ordinance approving a greenway conservation easement between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County through the Metropolitan Board of Parks and Recreation and Habitat for Humanity of Greater Nashville, Inc. for greenway improvements at 3028 Greenwood Drive. And finally, BL 2024-625 by Gregg, An ordinance to authorize, well, this is a companion bill. Can we go on and do that on consent? Companion bill to BL 2024-624, an ordinance to authorize building materials and restrictions and requirements in a proposed specific plan zoning district located at Pennington Bend Road, unnumbered, at the corner of Wooddale Lane and Pennington Bend Road to permit 39 multifamily residential units, all of which described herein. May I have a motion for the consent agenda? Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? With no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We will go back to number 1 on our agenda, starting with Resolution RS 2025-960 by Allen, Sorora, and Vo, a resolution approving an adjustment to the Mixed Income Pilot Program as authorized pursuant to ordinance number BL 2022-1170 program. May I have a motion? Moved and properly seconded. Now for discussion. Councilmember Allen.
So actually, I move for deferral.
Oh, okay.
If that's okay. With a brief explanation, this is an adjustment which is allowed to be done by resolution. I've been working with the planning department, specifically the housing division, and they are very close to having the unified housing strategy out and ready to go, and I'm going to try to get on the backside of that. So with that, I would like to move to defer this until the first meeting in May.
Okay. May 6th. All right. Thank you very much, Councilmember Allen. Is there any further discussion on the deferral? With no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Moving on to number 2 on our agenda, RS 2025-1067 by Cap Toombs Porterfield and Gamble, a resolution approving a preliminary engineering agreement between CSX Transportation, a Virginia corporation with its principal place of business in Jacksonville, Florida, and the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County to facilitate the replacement of an existing bridge on Eastland Avenue. May I have a motion? Move and properly seconded. Councilmember Cap, you are recognized.
Move approval.
Okay, I'm hearing from Director Darby that this item needs to be deferred for one meeting. Apparently, the planning department hasn't had enough time for their evaluation. Does anyone from planning want to talk about that?
Hi, yes, just, I'm sorry, when mandatory referrals are sent to the planning department, we typically have a 30-day window during which we can review that. This one was filed at council and submitted to us sort of simultaneously. We are working through the approval process, although that we understand that there might be a conflict with Piedmont Natural Gas. And so we need to get this deferred to allow for that additional conversation to happen. And we are still within that 30-day window of review.
Councilmember Cap.
On that basis, Chair, I'll move a one-meeting deferral.
Thank you. Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor of the deferral, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Moving on to number 5 on our agenda, BL 2025-742 by Benedict Evans Coupin and others, an ordinance amending Chapter 2.128 of the Metropolitan Code pertaining to the Metropolitan Historical Commission and the Metropolitan Historic Zoning Commission. May I have a motion? Is there a second? Moved and properly seconded, and we'll open up for discussion. But as we open it up for discussion, I would like to make a few comments. First, I want to say I appreciate Councilmember, I appreciate Councilmember Benedict's substitute bill that is being offered that she will talk about in just a minute here. In my opinion, which better distinguishes the difference between the Historical Preservation Commission and the Historical Zoning Commission, and the intent just to move the staff of the Historic Zoning Commission under the Planning Department. I will say that while I don't have a lot of or any historical overlays in my district, District 3, the district that I represent, we do have quite a few historic properties in the district. And I can see the value in having historic zoning staff aligned with the planning staff. I had a recent situation with the Patsy Cline home where it would have been helpful on the front end to have the planning staff working with the historic zoning staff on the overlay that we eventually came to a conclusion on. But again, speaking from the community perspective, I see the value in that. However, there have been a lot of questions and concerns that have been raised by the community and council members, as we can tell by the many emails, over 100 emails that we've received about this bill. And in that regard, I've asked the Planning Department Director, Lucy Kemp, Historical Commission Director, Executive Director Tim Walker, and also the Human Resources Director, Shannon Hall, to be here today to answer any questions that you may have as needed. So with that, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Benedict.
Thank you, Chair. Move my substitute.
Moved and properly seconded.
All right. So first, I'd like to thank everybody who came out tonight, including our directors. And colleagues, I'd like to thank you for your robust discussion on Council Connect. Over the past 3 weeks, I've met with various stakeholders from Chair Wynn on the Metro Historical Commission to Chair Bell on the Metro Historic Zoning Commission to state historians to both directors multiple times. And as I've done that, as a result of everybody's feedback, I filed the substitute. And this is a pressing concern. I know that there's a lot of challenges with the speed at which this is going. In my conversations with people at the state, we need to get this done prior to when they adjourn, and they have a bill that they're going to move through. Having said that, this also is good legislation, in my opinion, in addition to the fact that we need to not allow the state to step into Nashville. So my substitute bill, first I want to share what this legislation does not do. It doesn't do anything to overlay districts. All existing and historical overlays, conservation overlays remain unchanged. And as is currently the case, any changes to an overlay creation, amendments or otherwise has to go through this legislative body. Historical programming. Chair mentioned that the Metro Historical Commission is not a part of this bill anymore. And so all of that remains independent, no changes to current programming, including cemeteries, historical markers, and of course the many events in which the MHC participates. This does not make any immediate changes. The transition of historic zoning staff will take effect by July 1st, giving time for a smooth transition. And additionally, the date is going to provide a clean break in the budget process in the next fiscal year, ensuring that Metro Historic and Planning are funded. And then in regards to the actual commissions themselves and their composition, this bill does not propose any changes to the structure or makeup of either the Metropolitan Historical Commission or the Metropolitan Historic Zoning Commission. They will continue to function as they do today, similar to how the Housing Trust Fund does underneath planning today, whose staff are within the planning department. Now, some of the feedback that I've received, and I appreciate Chair letting me run through this. I think it's really important that I've got a lot of explanation here. I think it's critical that the public understands the new bill so that when we hear from them, they can understand how things have changed to make sure that we get this right. Feedback that I've received, the special committee at the Metro Historical Commission recommended removal of the last paragraph of the original bill requiring a study of the Metro Historical Commission, and that has been removed. I thank those commissioners for their feedback. The Metro Historic Zoning Commission is not proposing any amendments beyond those already in the substitute. The Preservation Society, Historic Nashville, Inc., and constituents, I've met with all of these folks and many constituents in District 7 and from around the county, and they've all provided feedback that helps shape the substitute as well. Relative to those two organizations I called out, they both support this bill as well. So here's what the substitute does do, and this is all, again, based on all of that feedback and engagement with all of those different stakeholders. So the first change, and this is in the substitute, we've got a clean copy on our desks. There is a red line copy in the packet that is messy to read, so please, for ease of reading, check out the clean copy of it. So the first change is in section 1, subsection B. While we funded MHC for the hiring of staff, nowhere in our code does it authorize our director to hire staff. So this just adds that into the code. The second change is that it creates the official position of a historical zoning administrator to report to the executive director of planning. This includes specific criteria that this role must have, and that criteria mirrors what the director of the Metro Historical Commission qualifications are, with the exception that these are relative to zoning. So the same type of expertise is going to be needed for this person in that role. This provides that it transfers all historical zoning staff to the planning department, and these transfers will include protection of civil service for all employees currently on staff at Metro Historic Zoning. They have that today. Planning staff does not have that today. That will continue with this. And thank you for inviting Director Hall in case there's questions about that. Director Kempf has confirmed that a review will be done to ensure all staff land softly. That includes any processes that could be enhanced. I think many concerns that I've experienced will be improved and with streamlined communication and practices that planning has today. The third change and the final change is that new position, the historical zoning administrator, must approve a demolition permit. Nothing changes in regards to the timeline, but I view this, I view this in parallel to the current zoning administrator. The zoning administrator works under the umbrella of codes, and yet they have their own Board of Zoning Appeals. So I liken this approval for that, for this section in Title 16 to that process there. So what I'm asking for today is your approval on second reading with a public hearing to be held on March 18th. The question about why we need to move that quickly, I think I'd like the administration table to chime in on this, but I have it on authority from conversations as recently as today that the state's bill that would strip Metro Historic zoning oversight altogether in the tourism development zone, which will, the state bill is scheduled to proceed on Wednesday if we don't do something, pass something tomorrow. What the TDZ is, the Tourism Development Zone, it includes the Central Business District downtown, but it goes all the way down West End and Charlotte, all the way to 440. It's a huge swath of the city that we would have no historic zoning power over at all, the way that their bill is written today. They also have a caption bill, and who knows what that could turn out to look like. So I know that people have questions for the directors, and I look forward to hearing their responses. I've had many conversations with them, as I said, but I look forward to your feedback. And so with that, I renew my motion for approval.
Thank you. All right, moving on through the queue, I saw Councilmember Gadd's hand, I saw Councilmember Coopin's hand, and Councilmember Allen and Cortez. So we will start with Councilmember Gadd. That's who I saw first. Councilmember Gadd, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you so much to Councilmember Benedict. Thank you for the conversations that you've been having since the bill's been filed. I'd also like to take a moment to thank my two constituents who have come today, who, as they've shared, they represent over 1,200 homes in District 24, which I believe, whether it's the current staff over at the Historic Commission and over at zoning or planning, can note that I believe District 24 has nearly 8 historic overlays. I guess the couple of questions that I have is, with the changes presented in the substitute, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and how does this solve them? And then I've got a couple other questions if possible.
Who is your question addressed to?
To the sponsor.
To the sponsor, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleague, Councilmember Gadd, for the question. So there have been challenges that I've had in the district relative to engagement and also relative to processes, things like mailers. Recently, I had a change to an overlay that I had proposed. The Historic Zoning Administrator was unable to fund an additional mailing to get survey results for that. I personally paid for that out of my pocket, not campaign account. It was less than $300. That's something that within the planning department, they just do on the regular anytime that something is being proposed. So that's one example of something that I believe could get fixed. I also think that there was an example in District 15 last term where an RV park was being approved through a specific plan that was along the Cumberland River, and based on the folks in District 7 who lived across from the Cumberland River, they said this area really matters. We've got bald eagles, et cetera. And so a lot of changes were made to that specific plan. One thing that I got done was adding an amendment to involve our archaeologist to see were there any artifacts along the Cumberland River there. Indeed, there were. And so as a result of that amendment going on that SP at council, we were able to get that review done. That could have been started when the specific plan was filed for if we had that type of engagement that we don't currently have.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. I appreciate those specific examples. I'm not sure how this bill specifically drafted addresses those changes, unless it would be done through an MOU through planning to understand historic could the planning department or we also have folks here from historic could explain exactly how this this specific piece of legislation addresses and makes changes to those specific examples that we were lifted up.
Thank you. We'll start with Director Kemp and then go to Director Walker. There we go.
Am I on? Okay. So I like to think of anything we do in governance at a macro and a micro level. The macro level, in my view, is that we need to be doing more and better preservation throughout the city. And how do you scale up to do that effectively? So within the department, we bring our subdivision regulations, our rezoning work, and even a new real property team to help us think strategically about how to meet that mission. I think it's reasonable for anyone in this role or in ours to say, are you better able to effectuate a mission through independence? And reasonable people can have a conversation about that, or by bringing together various disciplines to a broader platform so you can broaden your reach. I can share with you that we work closely with the historic zoning team when there's a vulnerable property and it may not be protected, and we will use our regulations and our ability to protect that property that they may not have access to. So a part of it is, in our experience, through collaboration, and we're an interdisciplinary department, you're able to sort of think about how to scale up to meet the need of the city. The micro issues are ones that all of us as departments confront. Questions of consistency, questions of how you resolve conflict between other departments. And what I have heard about historic zoning is something that I hear about other departments as well, is that we don't have effective conflict resolution tools between departments. Some of that, Councilwoman, may be because the code did not authorize previously zoning in the Historic Commission the way that it needed to. So today you've got the staff being hired through the Historical Commission. It's not authorized to do zoning work in the code today. So actually what Councilwoman Benedict has proposed in elevating a zoning administrator role, clarifying that they can hire staff and have functions doing that work, is an important point of elevation.
So
it's sort of how I see that.
So currently, Metro Historic Zoning is operating illegally because we don't have.
I didn't say that. So
Okay.
There's two commissions. One of them is authorized currently to hire staff, and that is the Historical Commission. And
Yes.
so they have hired the staff.
So they are allowed to hire staff currently.
Right.
And so this bill
Metro-
changes.
So the Metro Historic Zoning Commission is not currently authorized to hire staff. And so here you're giving a platform that, whatever changes you continue to make, I'm just suggesting it's always good to have the departments performing zoning land use functions be enabled to do that. The planning department is enabled in state law, the charter, as well as the code to do the work we do. That's different than what the codes department is enabled to do and what the historic zoning staff are enabled to do. But we all have to work together to try to accomplish our objectives. And so I think one of the things that the legislation has been trying to do is make sure that the various platforms where we're solving preservation problems are authorized to do that. We can develop regulations to accomplish that. And then you can resolve issues that you have with other departments in a straightforward way. That's the micro perspective. Does that help?
Currently, staff that's hired are allowed, we're authorized to be hired. So I'm just trying to understand the distinction you're lifting up and why that's a current problem.
I'm not suggesting it's so there's two commissions pertaining to
that.
historic, right?
Yeah.
So one of those commissions, the Historical Commission, is what is currently enabled to hire staff. The Historical Commission does not have zoning duties or responsibilities. The Historic Zoning Commission does, and they're not enabled. And so while these may seem like inside baseball kinds of things here, I actually think it didn't set up the historic zoning staff well to succeed. And it's really important that people have authorization from this body to be able to do their work well, right? You are able to develop regulations to protect historic properties, and we as a body have enabled you to do that. That's a really important when you're going and you're sitting down with a fire marshal and you have a disagreement in inches or feet over an ingress or egress point. Whose rules govern? Well, having authorization from this body to do that work is really important. So I don't know why it was set up that way, 15, 20, whenever the commissions were set up and what the staffing is set up this way. But I think it's important, regardless of what we do, to make sure the departments are set up to do their work well.
This is great to know that the departments weren't set up appropriately when they were created. Wow, that's amazing news. Great
Thank you,
to hear.
Councilmember
I would
Gadd.
also like to add a couple of more,
Did you not want to hear from Director Walker?
If he's wanting to be recognized, I can definitely hear from him on that.
I don't.
Please state your name. I'm sorry for the viewing
Absolutely.
audience.
Tim Walker, Executive Director of the Metro Historical Commission. And I think your question originally referred to the two items that Councilmember Benedict noted. I think those could have been addressed with just more communication, maybe working the directors sitting down and working out that communication in a more effective manner. As far as the issue that's been brought up about the pending state legislation that's been filed, I really can't address that. I would look to Darren Jernigan, who's the liaison from the mayor's office, who's been working with those state legislatures. He can more clearly address those issues. It is, I understand, a threat that is concerning, but again, I can't address that specifically.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate Director Walker. Thank you, Director Kemp. So the bill in front of us, one of the issues that the Director of Planning is saying that is being addressed, has been able to respond to by articulating this in a code. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but this is one proposed way of moving it forward. Is that correct? I mean, it's not the only way to move that forward for that authorization, but this is one way to move that forward.
Right. I mean, like I said, there are a lot of different ways to approach governance in a city. And there are some times when independence can elevate a core mission. And then there are some times when collaboration from a larger platform gives you more reach. And
Absolutely.
I think reasonable people can agree or disagree. This approach
Is a way to approach it.
This approach suggests collaboration in a larger platform would give you more reach. And like I said, I think reasonable people can
disagree
debate
on
and discuss that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. So just trying to get back to the problem that's been identified, I keep coming back that it's apparently twofold. Even though it's addressed one way from the sponsor, lifting up specific constituent issues, Everything that was shared in the introduction of the surveys, that everything stays intact, but we are under threat from a piece of state legislation that, according to the schedule last week, was not scheduled for committee this week. So, but if the mayor's office has a different schedule of state legislation that was scheduled this week that we're monitoring, Mr. Jernigan, when I spoke to him last, I wasn't aware it was scheduled for committee this week or subcommittee, which would need to be before it moves on to the full committee. But anyway, so that's one area, is a threat of state legislation that could remove local authority. The legislature is announced from the speakers that they'll be in session until April 11th. Is their closing week of their goal for passing a budget, which is the only constitutional requirement they have in order to adjourn for the year. So, so we're not under a threat of that bill being scheduled and heard this week, unless that gets informed otherwise. But from what I saw, I didn't see it on the calendar. So there's that where we do have a little breathing room. It's not a lot if that is the threat we're talking about. Now, if we're talking about the sponsors is talking about, which are constituent issues regarding notices, regarding information and mailers going out, I think that would actually be really helpful to engage some of us in larger districts. I know, Madam Chair, you've been really great to make sure we're being effective in our community and our district engagement. And one way to do that is to actually have legislation that is actually going to be voted upon. So then we can take that back. So with the substitute, then we can take that back to our communities to really engage information, get our stakeholders who have this wonderful, great information, like Director Kemp is able to share, which is really incredibly helpful. Maybe other legal counsel, the other entities that are community organizations that I know all of us have spoken with, whether it's Director Walker over the Historical Commission, the mayor's office, who has a position on the substitute, so they can adequately share that. And so with that, I will, if after the consideration of this substitute, I will move for a deferral. And then we can align any kind of public hearing. But I want to make that notice on the floor that what I'll ask for is, after the consideration of this substitute, is a deferral for this bill. So those of us with, and I appreciate again, my neighborhood associations who represent over 1,200 households, but I actually have almost 3 times as many as that in historical overlays, who can understand how all of their work on the consolidated guidelines and how those applications and how that's all going to apply under a new proposed changes that will come to effect. So it looks like with the state, we'll have a little breathing room, a little time. They're going to be here for just a little bit longer. And the beautiful thing there is it doesn't, I see head shaking, but with the state legislative process, that doesn't move through and pass in 1 week. They actually have to take a few more days out of public notice. So with that, I will sit down in case other colleagues have.
Thank you, Councilmember Gadd. We do have several of our colleagues on the list for discussion, and I appreciate you holding off on your motion so that we can have some more discussion, particularly with the guests who are here today. I have you on. Councilmember Coopin, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some thoughts and then some questions, and appreciate the sponsors' hard work on this. I know that there's been a lot of conversation and feedback, and I appreciate that. From what I've seen, she's been open arms and going to meetings and talking to constituents and really trying to work to shape this bill into something that everybody can be happy with and excited about. So I really appreciate that. I also appreciate the Historical Commission and Zoning Commission and the staffs who have worked tirelessly over the last couple of weeks, having multiple meetings, and especially for our resident volunteers who are part of these boards and commissions, and the neighborhood associations as well. It excites me as a preservationist to see this engagement, to see folks give their time and energy to historic preservation in our city. I think it's really exciting. And of course, we do have the state bill, and we'll probably look for some more guidance on this in a minute, but my understanding is that I wish we could defer. I wish we had more time to engage, but we're kind of out of runway. And once the state moves it, it's not about getting it approved. Once it gets moved and starts to move through that system, my understanding is there's not a guarantee we can pull it back. So right now, my understanding is that if we pass this and do this reorganization, we can then pull the state bill back or prevent it from coming out of the gate. But once it's out of the gate, it's its own animal. And so we have no guarantee at that point that we can pull it back at all. I think that from the question earlier that was raised by my colleague of what problem are we trying to solve, I obviously represent both the downtown district in question, but also the historic Germantown and Salemtown neighborhood. So I've seen what's working really well, and I've certainly seen what's working not so well. And I think back to Director Kemp's point earlier, there's a structural issue here where the Metro Historic Commission is empowered to hire a Metro Historic Commission director, all with requirements and prerequisites in the preservation space. It's really important work. It's really great work that they do, and I'm glad to see that they are staying put. No studies, no movement. They're staying where they are. I think that was the right call. But there is no Metro Historic Zoning Commission staff. It doesn't exist in the code. The only way it exists is because the bylaws of the Historic Zoning Commission pull over the staff of MHC, borrow, if you will, those staff members to staff that commission. And again, there's nowhere in there that says they have to have any sort of zoning background or experience. Not that they don't, but it's not required. So to me, it does make sense to make the code not silent and put in there something about who's going to run it. I'm really excited and appreciate the sponsor keeping in language about a historic zoning administrator. It preserves the prerequisites of someone to run this commission so that the individual that will run the Historic Zoning Commission will have demonstrated a knowledge and a background in historic preservation and in zoning. So it's not going to be someone who wants to remove all the historic overlays or anything like that. It's going to be someone who's demonstrated care in that space. And you know, again, I think that's really important. It's going to be in planning, which I think is where it belongs. I think our planning and zoning should be in the same space. As an example, the downtown design team have been working on adjustments to our bonus height program. Meanwhile, Metro Historic Zoning Commission staff have been working on updates to the downtown guidelines around historic, both running in silos, not really talking to each other. Not in a negative way, just there's no mechanism to make them talk to each other. And if they were talking to each other, there'd be a synergistic effect, in my opinion. So I think there's a lot of benefit. I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be, as someone who cares about preservation, I think it's going to be good. I hear the neighborhood concerns. I spent a lot of time talking to different folks and wish we did have more time, but I, for one, don't want to see us lose downtown and lose the control over downtown's historic nature. And I think this is good policy from a bad situation. And so I think that's, I guess the last thing I'll say before I ask some questions is folks have asked me about the planning department, and I've seen some folks say, oh, they're developer centric, they're only about developers. I haven't seen that. I can say there's probably a few folks even in this room that would attest to the fact that Director Kemp and her team are very willing to push back and to make the product better and make sure that what's being built in our city enhances our residents, enhances our quality of life, and is not just go build whatever you want. And as evidenced, for example, by the Elliston Place preservation project where a developer wanted to build and the planning could have authorized that. They could have said, let's do it. And instead they said, well, we can do it if you put a historic overlay on that site. And so that compromise came out of a planning conversation. So I do think that there's precedent for it to be really, really good and really collaborative process. I'm going to jump into questions because I know there's a lot of people in the queue. So I guess the first question is for the mayor's office. And I'd love to hear, first of all, what the mayor's office position is on the substitute, and then also any insight on state legislation and how much time we do or don't have as it pertains to deferrals and things of that nature.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Council member, we appreciate Council members Benedict's partnership on this legislation. We support the substitute. I think many of you know that Mayor O'Connell has a long history of supporting historic preservation in Nashville. Before he was on council as a neighborhood leader, when he was on council helping to create the Edge Hill Neighborhoods Conservation Zoning Overlay, Marathon Villages Historic Preservation Overlay. And then today he's supporting this effort here to ensure good governance, the elevation of historic functions, and local control. As far as the state legislation goes, there are two pieces of legislation of concern out there. Councilmember Gadd's correct that those are not on notice right now. They don't need to be. Right now, if the council passes this, it will happen. Go backwards. The legislature is shooting to adjourn the second week of April, which means that they'll want to be passing their legislation by the beginning of that first week of April at the latest and not roll the dice. That means getting the legislation moving. Once the train starts moving, it's difficult to stop. And we're going to be trusting that they, end up not, stop it at the last second there by moving this all the way to April. So sadly, we don't have the luxury of time on the timeline that we've got right now. Of course, we don't know that for sure. That's our expectation.
Thank you, Councilmember Coopin.
Thank you. I guess this would be to planning and maybe historic. Whoever wants to take it, take it. So how would the process to create, remove, or change an overlay work going forward? Does that change at all? Is it the same? And would they be going to the historic zoning administrator, or who would be originating that?
Thank you, Director Kemp.
This body is responsible for approving or removing overlays, and what I would envision is you would have more collaboration at the staffing level. We have a design studio that has architects and landscape architects, and I think that they could add quite a bit to sort of the historic zoning staff deliberations and vice versa about how to think about design guidelines for new development in historic areas. So I would hope you would see fuller staff investment and a richer sort of staff involvement on both ends. But the Planning Commission also provides advice about overlays as well. So I would assume that it would be as it is today, except there would be some fuller integration at the staff level in terms of feedback to this body.
Thank you. That just a couple more. I know that currently there are some admin approvals that happen at historic zoning, and I believe at planning as well, and then there are some that go to the commission. What would go to the historic zoning administrator versus what would go to the commission? And would the historic zoning administrator have kind of discretion over that, or is there kind of preset as to what room to maneuver they have?
So let me step back a moment and say, so I've been in this role for 6-7 years, sorry. COVID time was a wash. Since that time, we've moved GIS staff to ITS. We've moved a mobility planning section into NDOT after recommending the creation of NDOT in Nashville Next. We've brought on a housing section. And in all of those cases, we did programmatic reviews with the staff, usually with the goal of enhancing and actually increasing the scope of work. So the GIS team that went to ITS won a national award last year because our platform at planning wasn't quite broad enough for them to extend their reach. That's just an example. The housing team, with your leadership and support, has tripled since coming to planning. And so it's really actually about highlighting the work. But all of those came with a programmatic evaluation and an agreement between planning and the board or with the other department. And so what I would envision is a programmatic look. It would take time. And basically what that asks is, what's our core mission? What are we doing to be effective at our core mission? And what changes do we need to make to be effective? And you do that with a lot of collaboration within the department, with the MHCC oversight. And then you come and we would probably have an MOU, which I have with the Housing Commission today, that basically sets the terms for working together. And so we would never rush into any decision about changing a process without a lot of input and thought about why we would do that. And so there's a lot of, again, macro thinking, big picture. What are we trying to do? micro thinking, what are the small fixes that we can make to help something work better? And it's all done with quite a bit of transparency. So the work isn't done at all. We've done programmatic reviews throughout our department as well in our teams. So it's really about, again, scaling up to meet the moment. And so I would anticipate an MOU. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think that was pretty good.
Yeah, so I don't want to tell you today we would be making changes because I come with no assumptions about what is an administrative review. What I can promise is that we'll have the core question, what are we trying to achieve, and then make sure all of our process flows stem from that.
All right, last.
Councilmember Director Walker is at the podium there. I think he may want to answer your question as well.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Chair.
Thank you. I was just going to clarify that. It is the administrative approval that is given, that authority is given by the Historic Zoning Commission. All of that authority lies with them. There was a time where there was no administrative approval, so any additional administrative approval or changes that has to be approved by the commission itself. And legal may want to weigh in on that, but
So am I correct in understanding that the Metro Historic Zoning Commission retains the authority to grant or revoke administrative? So a new historic zoning administrator couldn't come in and just start approving things administratively. The Historic Zoning Commission would have to allow or not allow them to do that.
that is correct.
Thanks.
Councilmember Cooper, if we can wrap up your
Yes.
question, I don't mean to rush
Not at all.
you, but
Got
we
one-
have a list here and we are already past the time for ending this meeting. So
Got one-
appreciate you condensing those. Thank
One
you.
quick softball for Director Kemp, for Director Walker, but with this new structure, would the Planning Commission have oversight on the Metro Historic Zoning Commission, or would they remain independent bodies?
No oversight. They're independent bodies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Allen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up on the memorandum of understanding because that's important to me. I think I appreciate all the discussion we've had. There was some really good discussion on Council Connect, which is not part of this legislation. All this legislation does is move things underneath and doesn't talk about all the fine tuning that we've heard here that is really an important assurance to me that we're not making the kind of changes that I think are what people were rightly very concerned about. And so my question to the director is, if we do move forward with this, I would echo Councilmember Gadd's concern. The legislation that we see before us does not address any of the questions, of the issues that were laid out as the reasons for this. All that happens in the very detailed explanation in Council Connect, and I think the MOU is sort of the way to formalize that. Timeline-wise, if this were to go forward, how does that process happen? And is there any possibility of having a draft or a concept or a something before we had to have the final vote on this?
Thank you.
Sure. The MOU, the one that we did with the Housing Commission was simply a terms for working together, how we approach our work, what their expectations can be for me, and my expectations for working with them. And it really lays out a process for how to do our work together. I'm happy to provide, because I've done it in some of these other cases, sort of the types of issues that we would cover in an MOU. That's not a problem at all.
And that preliminary thing could be provided fairly quickly, knowing that that's not the final product, because the final product has to be collaborative.
Of course, right.
Okay.
Yes, the final product I would want to have the MHCC review and weigh in on. But I'm happy if it is helpful to this body to know sort of the types of issues that I would envision being in that document. I'm happy to do that.
That would
of
be very
course.
helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Councilmember Cortez.
Thank you, Chair. The sponsor made a comment about a project she was working, and there was some issues with wildlife that she thought could have been handled sooner if there was collaboration. Since we have members of both Planning and the Historical Zoning Commission here, can we just set a foundation for constituents and say, if an individual or an entity has to engage with both departments on a project, what does that look like? When will they touch each department, and why is there such a wide range of responses that they're receiving?
Okay. Who would like to go first? So I guess your question is, you wanting to know what the process is for entity that would come to either the historical commission
Yes.
or the planning commission
Yes,
for zoning.
if an individual or an entity has a project that has to be touched by both agencies,
Okay.
what does that process, when would they engage with each agency, and why are they receiving feedback at such different times?
Okay. Director Walker, would you like to start with that, the process for if someone comes to you needing historical zoning assistance, and then we'll go to Director Kemp.
So if an applicant comes to the Historic Zoning Commission because they're in an overlay district and they need assistance, if it requires a zone change, we're going to immediately forward them because we do not affect base zoning. This is an overlay, so it goes on top of the base zoning. But if they're wanting any change to the base zoning, then we send them to the Planning Commission, and they'd be working with the Planning Commission through that process because that is their review and not ours. Does that answer your question?
It does. It's starting to. I just want to set a foundation for constituents to understand what this process looks like, because they probably want to punch themselves in the face listening to us talk about this nuance. And I want to make sure they understand what we're debating, and also understand why certain things like the sponsor mentioned, we're getting feedback at such different stages throughout that process.
Thank you. Councilmember Kemp, if you want to take it over from that point of when you're contacted about.
I think it depends on the kind of project. And one of the challenges we have in this city to do great preservation is that some of our federal and state laws could be stronger to support our doing that. There's so much pressure on the local government and local landscape to do that work well. And we have protective property rights as we should, and what it has made a strong city. But what it means is none of us in the departments can go and impose protections when they don't exist today. So often we have to have an agreement with the property owner. What I think planning is trying to learn to do well is to use development agreements and other tools in a negotiation where we have a rezoning, a subdivision, a land acquisition, where we can prioritize preservation. We've helped to protect 19 buildings downtown that weren't protected otherwise through development agreements and negotiations. So what I will say to you is sometimes we'll get a proposal that's very narrow in its definition, but if you step back and you just put the lens out a little bit, you might see an opportunity to protect a resource that's vulnerable. I'm not saying we're perfect at it. We're trying to get better at that. And that often requires bringing multiple teams together at planning to get that done. So I think it's a scope. It's a problem of scope.
So what I'm hearing is collaboration would help this process immensely. And it's upon this body to find a process that would bring that collaboration together. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm a firm believer, and you can see how we've developed the department over the last 5 to 10 years, that an interdisciplinary approach solves hard problems. And so I do believe through collaboration, you can get big things done, especially in a constrained regulatory environment that we have. You have to think outside the box.
Thank you. And can I have one more question for historical?
Just one more, please.
Okay. But I'll talk with them after. That's fine. I know you have to move through this.
Thank you.
I do want to say thank you to the Planning Department, and thank you to the Historical Zoning Commission for coming today. Very much appreciate all your work.
Thank you. Councilmember Sarara, you recognize.
Thank you, Chair. And I also want to thank the sponsor and everybody, too. I also want to thank the community members for pushing back. I think, like many of you, preservation was something that I was worried about. And I think that with the feedback from the community and everyone else, the sponsor has been able to go back and make some changes and leave historical zoning alone as it is. And so that's a good win for the community. My question to Director Kemp is this, and I wanted her to have this on record. It's the same question that Councilmember Gard and Allen were trying to ask, which is what I felt this bill was not addressing, which is the issue at hand. We know there was a problem. we know that part of what I read in all the stories was that staff were not flexible. There were situations wherein things could have been done differently. In addition to the state coming behind their back, that was the reason, that was what I read. And so if the staff are being moved from one department to another, how does that solve that? That was part one. The second thing that I also saw is, and I think it was also demonstrated here today, is that the Historical Zoning Commission still maintains the process and the rights and the oversight. And my question is this: even in the current situation, whatever the staff were doing were being approved by the board. And so if the board still has the final say, how does this solve that issue? Because the board will still have to approve it, whether it's coming from zoning on the historical commission or coming through planning. And so those are the two things that I want us to address, because I think with that actually showing how we're going to fix that, I think it's just, other than getting the state off our back, I think we're just not solving any problem, in my opinion.
Okay, Director Kim. Thank you,
She keeps
Councilmember
calling me
Sarrar.
Councilman. What's happening? What's happening? Okay, so I think in any organization that is doing important regulatory work with a commission, again, you have to ask, what's the direction we want to go? What do we care about? And in this case, it's preservation and scaling up to meet the moment of a growing city and doing more and better preservation work. So you have that as your due north. And then you say, and I mentioned a programmatic review, we've done these in our department. You work on what is our process to accomplish what is most important? What is our priority? And then you do work within the staff team to identify where there are patterns or weak points, where there might be disagreements between, the community that has the overlay and where the overlay is in place and how the staff is interpreting that work. And then you always go back to the commission and you say, here are 5 or 6 instances where the same question has come up. Do we need a different answer? And so it's really an iterative process of making sure you're working with the staff and with the commission. And we do this with the Planning Commission. You go back to the Planning Commission and say, are we interpreting this question properly? And is it helping us meet our overall objective, which is to promote and preserve the character of this city? And so then that helps you really prioritize what we're spending our time on. I have heard anecdotes that the staff are focused on some very narrow, detailed work, and that can be really important, but not in the absence of larger threats or questions that need to be solved, and not if there's any confusion amongst the public who have the regulations on them, right, to make sure that they understand what the rules are. And so it's really important to have an ongoing dialogue within the communities that have the overlays to make sure that they're relevant. And so to me, you don't just do an overlay or do a new zoning or design guideline and then assume the conversation is over. You just have to keep working it. Changes in sustainability and energy efficiency are challenging all of us about what the built environment needs to look like. You've got to go back and talk to the communities again. What can we do better? Are we meeting our mission? The same conversation with the Zoning Commission. So it's a lot of work sessions and trainings. That's how I approach it at the Planning Commission. Maybe they're exhausted, but.
Thank you. And to the sponsor, at least, I don't know if it's a question, but a clarification that what this bill now does after all the inputs and all the questions and everything from everybody is that it basically now takes the zoning part of the work and puts it on the planning with the Metro Historical Zoning Board or Commission, and then all the preservation work now stays with the Historical Commission. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That is 100% correct. So Metro Historical Commission and staff remains as is today. Metro Historical Zoning staff moves to the Planning Department. We've made departmental shifts in the past as well, reorganizations, NDOT being a big one, right? Metro Water, Metro Waste, NDOT from Public Works, right? We've done things, that's, huge, of course. But this is about, yes, giving that holistic approach to planning and zoning, making sure, as Director Kemp, so eloquently just described, that as we grow, we're keeping our rich history, that we're protecting our rich history. So this is just moving the staff. That's correct.
Thank you. And we have one last question. Councilmember Cap, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a question, which is, has this bill been substituted? Or are we still on the substitute?
We're still on the substitute discussion.
But, right, so it has not been substituted.
Correct.
So in that case, I will get back in the queue, whether after this bill gets substituted.
All right. Is there any more discussion on the substitute? Councilmember Sarara.
Just checking, what about the amendments?
We haven't gone through the amendments yet. Okay. Are we ready to move forward on the motion to approve the substitute? No, with no further discussion, all those in favor of the substitute, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion carries for the substitute. Now we will move to the amendments on the substitute, starting with Amendment 1 by Councilmember Cash. And if we can keep our questions limited to one, like I said, we are already 15 minutes over time. So we want to keep going and keep having this discussion, but if we can limit our questions, that'll be great. Councilmember Cash, you're
Thank you. I will try to be brief. I do want to say a few things. Does a member of the committee, I'm not on the committee, does a member of the committee need to move the?
Yes, thank you. May I have a motion to move the Amendment 1? And the second, moved and properly seconded. Thank you, Councilmember Cash.
Thank you. I kind of was looking at 3 amendments, and 2 of them, well, one was kind of about the uncertainty, and I guess some of the stuff that will come out of the MOU about, but really was about how council might be able to provide some oversight and collaboration with the Historic Zoning Commission as it relates to like guidelines changing or being amended or consolidated. However, that was not workable because the state is the one that gives the local historic zoning commissions the authority over the guidelines, right? Council places guidelines on properties. Historic Commission per state law creates and adopts the guidelines, right? And the second one was something that Councilmember Benedict's substitute recommended or changed, which was the 6-month study of the Historic Commission, which I didn't think was necessary. It's always good to look at departments and see how we can improve, but I didn't think that was necessary in the context of what we've been talking about here. My amendment is not major. It just is, the original bill had some recitals that kind of spelled out why this change might the reasons for this change taking place. And the substitute removed those, so I'd like those back in. And I'm not saying that I am, I can see that there is some reward here. There are some possibilities for betterment, and I can see that there is some risk that folks are concerned about. And I haven't come down exactly which is greater, and neither have my constituents by far. But I think having those in there doesn't make a legal change, but having those in there, I think, is useful to understand the context of the bill. So.
Okay, so I think
I can't
we'll open
move
it up. We'll open it up for discussion on Amendment 1. Councilmember Benedict.
Thank you, Chair. I'm supportive of this amendment and renew the motion unless colleagues have questions.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussion about the amendment? All right, all those in favor of the Amendment 1, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Moving on to Amendment 2 by Councilmember Sarara. Councilmember, first, if we can have a committee member move Amendment 2 so we can discuss it. Moved and properly seconded. Councilmember Sarara, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councilmember Cash, I think I have the same 2 amendments that he was thinking about that Council said we couldn't do. But based on my conversation with everybody, historic codes, planning that I could talk to, where I landed was that we are, and I just like the question, my last question to the sponsor, was that we're separating these 2 functions. And basically, we're keeping the zoning with the planning committee, planning department, and we're keeping preservation with the historical commission. That's my understanding, and based on everything that we have to do and where we are, that's where we're heading with the stay behind the back. And so my amendment in this particular case has to do with demolition. When you read the substitute that is being proposed, the codes did not spell out this function, and that's why the substitute has it spelled out. I agree with that. But in the substitute, it gives the function to the zoning administrator. Based on my conversation with codes and they're here and they can answer, and even with planning, I did not get a clear answer as to where this is a zoning issue. I think demolition is a preservation issue. Demolition is about checking whether it's historic or not. And so if we're separating the two departments and somebody needs to sign off on whether there should be demolition, I think it should be on the historic side, not the zoning side. And so that amendment leaves everything as is, but it just says that from codes that needs to be checked off should be done by the historical director and not the zoning director.
Thank you for that explanation of discussion. Councilmember Benedict.
Thank you, Chair. So I understand where my colleague is coming from, but what the language says is, so the substitute creates that new official position, historic zoning administrator. This section 14 for the codes is the historical zoning administrator has to give the approval. It's not the zoning administrator. It's not currently under codes. It's this new historic zoning administrator. So I want to clarify the record on that because it sounded like you were saying the zoning administrator. I want to make sure it's clear. The historic zoning administrator is the decision maker in the bill.
Councilmember Sarara.
Thank you. Yes. Just like historical commission, historic zoning commission, and maybe we need to look for names where it's not confusing. But at the end of the day, it's a preservation question.
Right.
And I think that decision should be made by the historical director, not the zoning.
Director Darby, if we could just get a clarification on that, if you have that in front of you, just to make sure that, I think, so that we're all clear on the language that is being used. In the bill, it says that demolition would be approved or considered by the zoning administrator or the historic administrator. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go.
In the substitute, it says that the historic zoning administrator would be able to put the hold on demolition for a historic property. In the substitute ordinance, it says that. In the original legislation, in the original of the current legislation or the current ordinance, sorry, I'm apologizing again, the current code, it says that the executive director of the historical commission would make that determination, that review, and determine whether or not there should be a hold on a demolition permit.
So this substitute does change that from the historic commission.
Changes it from the director of the historical commission to the historic zoning administrator, which is a position created by this substitute as well.
And Councilmember Sarara, your amendment puts it back with the historic. Okay. Further discussion. I saw Councilmember Allen, then Coopin, then Cash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two questions. One, as I understand it, it actually allows the Director of Codes to make the initial hold, and then it's the new zoning administrator position that says go or no go on that. And I think that's an important distinction that we need to understand. Is that correct?
Director Darby.
I believe the code as it currently exists, the demolition permit goes through codes. Codes then notifies historical commission, and then the director of the historical commission can determine whether they have, I believe, 90 days to determine whether or not that demolition should move forward.
Okay, that sounds good. And then there's language in here that says if this is a property that is historic register eligible but is not in an overlay, this is the process. A technical question I have is if something is in an overlay and it's historic register eligible, does that mean that the director of codes can issue a demo permit and he doesn't have to ask anybody? I see Hannah shaking her head.
What's not addressed in the substitute is the subsection B of section 16.28.195, which is not changing, and that addresses
Okay.
overlays.
Great. Okay, so we're good there. And then my second question, if I might, is I just would appreciate some input from the current historic director on his thoughts on which of those two parts of what, I mean, we're now admitting this takes two people to do. Which part of that person would he recommend?
Thank you. Director Walker, thank you.
I did talk to the sponsor about this for the amendment, and currently it does lie with us. This tool was created after demolition of a National Register listed property a couple of decades ago. It was hoped it would be an effective tool. It has not been as effective as I think we all hoped it might be in council at the time when they put that in place, because many times developers know that exists, so it's a part of their development timeline. So they are prepared for a 90-day hold. The whole point of this was to provide, made sure our department and the affected council member were aware of it and could have conversations with the property owner, developer about alternatives, make sure they were educated about those, and there was a chance for documentation of the property before it was demolished, if that was the ultimate outcome. So as far as the question of my preference, I think as long as there's an MOU or understanding how that will work, and we're a part of that process, I don't think I necessarily have to be the one, but I would want to ensure that we were a part of that engagement and we are aware, because we are the department that goes and documents the property.
Thank you. Councilmember Cash and then, Coopin, I'm sorry, Coopin and then Cash.
Thank you, Chair. And I think this was kind of answered in Director Walker's comments, but I guess could Special Counsel Darby weigh in on the demolition permit in a historic district, not an overlay? If the Historic Zoning Administrator or the Historic Commission Director in this current capacity, if they said, I really, really love this building, I don't want you to tear it down, can they say no to that demo permit, or is this more just the 90-day extension, but they have to approve it ultimately if it follows the right protocol?
This gives the director of the Historical Commission the ability to put a hold on it for 90 days. They don't have the ability to, determine that the permit should not be issued ultimately.
And after the 90 days, if the applicant decides that they want to tear it down, they're able to do so.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cash.
Thank you. I think Director Walker answered half my question. My understanding is that the two things that can be achieved during the 90-day hold is that there can be a conversation, like, is there a way to save the structure? And we can talk with the owners and see if there's an avenue to do that. And the second thing, and I think this is what Director Walker was touching on, he used the word document. Like if the building's going to be demolished, some staff can go in and kind of inventory things that might be inside the building that have historic significance. And so I guess I want to understand if that was what Director Walker was saying, that that inventory of those things that could be saved is done by the Historic Commission staff. And also, does either department have a role in having those negotiations or having that discussion about ways to save the building? And which department would that be, or which side of the department would that be? Thank you.
Thank you. Director Walker.
Yes, to answer your question about documentation, we really meant photographic documentation. If it's a very significant building, sometimes the owner, working with the council person, they've agreed to do as-built architectural drawings of it. We don't really get into salvaging it. We encourage salvaging it. We certainly don't want everything going to the landfill, and there could be parts of the building, whether it be a plaque like at the Morris Memorial Building or something associated with the history of the National Baptist Convention that needed to be saved. But that is for the owner to do, but we certainly highly encourage they salvage as much as they can.
Thank you. The Historic Commission staff, I guess is what he's asking for clarification.
I'm sorry, say that
The
again.
Historic Commission staff.
It's the Historic Commission staff that
Yes.
does that. Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Councilmember Gadd.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I know expediency with time, so thank you so much. For this particular amendment, thank you for bringing this forward. And I just wanted to share, just very briefly, a quick example with a property that has been under a demolition permit being issued. You do have that ability, have worked well with the commission staff of how that's currently placed to make sure that we're taking the time to offer other opportunities to those developers. He's exactly right, no matter where it's placed, but where it is now, developers or land they're purchasing properties that have an interest in demolishing, they're going to demolish it. But what's really wonderful is when you have this moment to actually share with them, documenting through photographs for our own history. And then, so ensuring that this maintains and actually having historians look through this property and document it is very important. So being able to maintain that, I think is incredibly important. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Evan Segal, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me, even though I'm not on the committee. I just have a practical question for the departments. I know in my neighborhood, I know I have seen in BZA meetings and District 6 examples of this. Sometimes somebody will pull a demo permit on a historic home, and instead of taking off what they're supposed to take off, they just like take off all of it, right? And they're not supposed to do that. And often it's done on the weekends. And one thing that we have run into over and over again in several historic districts is how to effectively sort of manage that on the back end. And whether it's through an MOU or the departments, I'm a little curious, like jurisdictionally, sometimes then it's like codes has to come out to do the stop work, even though the permit came from historic, and just as a matter of making that as efficient as possible, because obviously those are time of the essence situations to preserve those homes. If the various departments have opinions on what they think might be the most effective to help prevent that sort of illegal demolition under a validly issued permit.
Thank you. I know we haven't gotten to the MOU yet because we haven't gotten to passage of the bill yet, but if Director Kemp, if you want to share any experience or commitment to making sure that a MOU would provide that information, that would be great.
Yeah, I think the MOU would define the terms for working together. I do think codes is an important part of that discussion because they do have the stop work powers and really helping them to understand under what circumstances that needs to be effectuated. And then what does demo mean? And really looking at what the conditions are for approving that permit would be really helpful. And it'd be great to get some feedback from them on what would make them more effective if they're doing that kind of role. So.
Thank you. And we'll round it up with Councilmember Sarara, who's the sponsor of the bill, and then we'll cut off, unfortunately, need to cut off discussion on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that the essence of this amendment is to make sure things work the way they're supposed to. And like we've just heard that Historical Commission is needed to document when this demolition is taking place. Not only that, Historical Commission is responsible for historical properties that are already in the overlay. So they're already doing that for that. So this is just for the ones that are not in the overlay. And I think they should continue that work. What I will recommend or propose as part of the MOU is that when the Historical Commission does get the request, that they work with the historical zoning and planning as they do their work. But I don't see the need in splitting this because it's something they're already doing, number one. Number two, they do have a role to play in it. And that's why this amendment is saying leave it with the Historical Commission and they can work in tandem with the historical zoning and planning. Thank you.
All right, with that, we have a motion on the table and a second to move amendment number 2. We're ready for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Okay, can raise your hand if you're opposed. Any abstentions? Are you abstaining? Okay, you're opposed. You're opposed or abstain? Okay, thank you. All right. Motion carries 8 in favor, 4 against, 0 abstentions. Now, moving on to the last amendment, Amendment 3 by Councilmember Gadd, and she is a committee member, so I will move to Councilmember Gadd.
Thank you so much. This is just an amendment that
Would you like to move it?
I would like to move the amendment. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'd like to move the amendment.
Moved and properly seconded. Thank you.
And with that, this adds just the language of it for the zoning staff. It's not mandatory, it's not shall, but it's a should have historic preservation experience for the zoning staff. Just to make sure we have the intent for having that background. But this, according to my legal counsel helped draft this, working with HR, this doesn't prohibit if you need to, do otherwise, but this just encourages that. So with that, I'll move the amendment.
Thank you. Councilmember Benedict.
Thank you, Chair. This is a friendly amendment, and I hope my colleagues support it.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Amendment 3? All right. All those in favor of Amendment 3, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 12 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting. Now we are on the substitute bill as amended.
Move the substitute bill as amended, please, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Gadd, you're recognized.
I'd like to defer to, sorry, it looks like my colleague, Councilmember Cap, would like to be recognized. If you're okay, I'm happy to defer that.
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Cap, you're recognized.
Well, I was trying to get into the queue after Councilmember Gadd, but I'm okay to go if that's okay with her. Question for Director Darby. Am I right in understanding that this bill is not amendable on third reading?
That is correct. Without a suspension of the rules, as is for pretty much any rule we have.
Which requires unanimous consent.
No, a suspension of the rules, 2 people can object, and the rules would not be suspended.
Yes, thank you. I move a 1 meeting deferral. I think that the variety of rationales that have been offered for this legislation in this very meeting alone should be sufficient, especially since some of those rationales conflict with each other. And the variety of great questions about what this legislation actually does should also be a basis for a deferral, but I'd like to add one more. This bill is not amendable on third reading because it doesn't touch Title 17. It's not within Title 17. But it does very much affect the way that land use is done in our city, and it is consistent with general practice and public expectation that when there is a change like this, that the public hearing is on second reading. And I understand the sponsor is amenable to to a public hearing on the 18th. I would ask, and the effect of this motion would be that the public hearing then be aligned with second reading. So that's the basis for the motion, and I'd like to add another word about potential state legislation. We've heard a lot of representations today about what the state is or is not going to do. I would caution everybody not to take those for the gospel with which they were offered. I understand there is pending legislation, but we don't know what's going to happen to that legislation. And even if that legislation moves this week, that's not partnership. I think it's important in government to be clear about the reason for outcomes. If the state government's going to strip historic zoning protection from downtown Nashville, I think we should be abundantly clear whose responsibility that is. I think if our state partners say to us, we're going to, commit something that you don't want in Nashville unless you go ahead and do it for us. Well, I think the only dignified answer to that is, well, I'm not going to do that. So I think we should have a public hearing on second reading on this bill. I think we should move it, 1 meeting to have that on the 18th. And I think that we should do right by our constituents to not be rushed into something that we evidently, still have a lot of questions about, and to not do it under the duress of bad faith. So for that reason, I renew my motion for a 1 meeting deferral.
Thank you. Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. A question for Director Darby. A 1 meeting deferral in committee is an automatic deferral on the floor. Is that correct?
It's by Rule 8, yes.
Okay. So what I would ask of my colleagues is to vote down this deferral in committee. Let's have this dialogue. This has to go through another committee as well tomorrow through government operations. Let's have this dialogue on the floor. I think it's really important for all of our constituents to hear from all of us, not just this committee. So first that. Secondly, I don't trust the General Assembly not to take action against Nashville. That's not, we have a track record of winning in lawsuits sometimes, but we have a track record of getting preempted frequently. And so I don't think it's worth rolling the dice on that. So tomorrow night, if this is not deferred in committee, tomorrow night I will speak against a deferral. I certainly understand where my colleagues are coming from. I know the public wants to be engaged with this, and I want the public to be engaged with this. I think tomorrow night is where I move for the hearing on the 18th. I don't think I do that in committee. And then the other thing is that if we bring it on second reading on the 18th, the same night as the public hearing, it's amendable on second, but I'm not sure what other amendments would be brought as the result from hearing from constituents at that public hearing. I think once we are at second reading, we have the public hearing. Let's say we want to bring amendments as the result of that public hearing. We have to kick it another meeting. So then we're into April. At the April 1st meeting, then it would be on second, and it wouldn't be up for passage until after the state legislature is out. I don't think that that timeline works to protect our city. I don't think that that timeline works to keep historic zoning control over the TDZ, and not just in our city, but other folks around the state are looking to us as well. So with that, I would certainly recommend that, or ask my colleagues to vote down the deferral in committee, and that if they do want to seek a deferral, that it be on the floor tomorrow so that we can have this discussion tomorrow.
Thank you. Vice Chair Weatherford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that this matter is altogether too important for us as a committee to stand alone and make the decision on deferral for the entire body. I believe if the entire body decides on deferral, then so be it. But I think the debate itself needs to move to the full body. And we also have another committee to hear from as well. So for that reason, I stand against the deferral motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I was just seeking clarity on on the floor at the last council meeting, did we schedule a public hearing for the meeting of the 18th? So if this committee were to take action that caused automatic deferral, the sponsor would not then be able to move for that public hearing that they've committed to. That's my understanding anyway, right? Is that accurate, Director Darby, if that's appropriate?
The sponsor would not be able to move for a public hearing during the pendency of the main motion to approve or defer the bill in front of you. However, if a member were to be recognized by the vice mayor tomorrow night for the purposes of making a motion for a public hearing, then that is something that would be acceptable. I say acceptable, but the vice mayor would have to recognize somebody, but that is proper
That wouldn't
procedure.
be on the agenda, but there is an avenue to request that if someone went to the vice mayor and requested that. So anyway, thank you for that explanation. I think I'm going to vote against the deferral motion here in committee because I think the reasons that have been brought up of allowing the full body the chance to discuss this again, and also to give the sponsor, if they choose to do that, the opportunity to request a public hearing. We know that's a high threshold that it has to reach for those. And so I would just like to have the opportunity for that discussion on the floor tomorrow. So I'll be voting against the deferral. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Coopin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be brief, but I agree with what kind of the cadence of my colleagues, that I think that this matter has affected many folks that are on this committee, but also folks that are not on this committee. So, I would stand against the deferral in committee to allow for us to discuss it on the floor tomorrow. Also, I would hope that maybe there's a possibility to get a little more clarity on the specifics of the state's timeline by the meeting tomorrow. And I understand it's moving quickly, but figuring out just how quickly So I would stand, against the deferral here. Again, would love public engagement, would love opportunities for a public hearing and for people to weigh in. As the council person over downtown, it would candidly break my heart to lose our protections in downtown. So it's not necessarily a gamble I want to take, especially on legislation that I think is ultimately actually additive versus subtractive. But I think that should be a discussion for the full body. Thank you.
Thank you. And I thought I saw Councilmember Gadd. Yes, Councilmember Gadd, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I think, like other my colleagues worried about the state, I did go back and talk to the lobbyists or writers of the amendment or who brought the legislation to the state. So we can personally urge them to give us the opportunity that we would like, since they are also Nashvillians, to actually be able to take this to defer it in committee, which is I would urge my colleagues to support here. So we have an opportunity with the substitute, and this is why I think several of us want to make sure we had the substitute on the bill. So we actually have the opportunity for those of us who have nearly 8 overlays in our district that work on those consolidated guidelines to understand and actually invite members of the planning department, the Historic Commission, and actually do a community meeting before we move the substantive bill and have a very robust, beautiful thing is it doesn't prevent us from having a robust discussion when we do bring it to the council floor. So that's wonderful, and I'm really appreciative of my colleagues wanting to make sure we have the full body's engagement there, because that will continue to exist, and this does not do anything to eradicate that. So I would really urge my colleagues, for those of us who have constituents, I'm appreciative of those who came tonight, that we have constituents across the county, but also just to make sure folks understand exactly how this is going to be impacted. I understand my colleagues that represent downtown, my colleague represents downtown, has that same interest. And so now that we actually have the adopted substitute, this would be a perfect time for us to take the one meeting deferral. So to actually be able to discuss with our community, and we'll have an opportunity to request a public hearing. And we could actually set that date tomorrow. We can urge our colleagues to support a public hearing from the floor tomorrow, and that pathway has been laid out to us. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Allen, you're recognized.
Thank you, ma'am. Just for clarification, if this committee does vote for a one meeting deferral, will there be an opportunity to move the substitute before we do that one meeting deferral tomorrow?
Director Darby.
No, the one meeting deferral will be a Rule 8 deferral, which means it is deferred for one meeting without debate or discussion. So all of the substitutes and amendments that have been discussed here tonight will not go on the bill tomorrow night. They will be carried forward with a deferral to the next meeting on the 18th. This committee will pick them up again.
Thank you. Any further discussion? And we'll been asked for a roll call vote, so we'll do a roll call vote on this. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. That this is in favor of the deferral. And those against the deferral. Any abstentions? All right, motion carries motion not approved. Motion fails. 3 in favor, 9 against, 0 not voting. Thank you. That concludes that bill 742. And we're motion on approval. God, I'm trying to rush us through. Motion to approve the bill as substituted with amendments 1, 2, and 3. May I have a motion? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? One opposed? Any abstentions? Abstain? All right. Motion carries. 10, 1, 1. 10 in favor, 1 against, 1 abstention. All right. All right. Moving on to number 7 on our agenda. And that is our last one. BL 2024-624 by Greg, an ordinance to amend Title 17 of Metropolitan Code of Laws and Zoning Ordinance of Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County by changing from R15 to SP zoning for property located at Pennington Bend Road at the corner of Wooddale Lane and Pennington Bend Road to permit 39 multifamily residential units, all described in herein. May I have a motion from a committee member? In a second. Anybody? Chair, Vice Chair, second. Thank you. Moved and properly seconded. Councilmember Gregg, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment on
Okay.
this piece of legislation. So this bill was introduced in the last term prior to my election. Since that time, I've held 2 community meetings and then had a conversation with the developer and many members of the community. And they've asked for one request. In the original SP, it called for a walking trail to be installed in the wetlands area, therefore removing a large tree canopy. The neighbors have requested that that not be a part of the SP moving forward. So this amendment removes that walking trail and keeps the tree canopy in place.
Okay. Thank you for that great explanation. And this is a substitute. Yeah, they did. And seconded. All right. Well, it's been moved and do we have a second on the substitute from a committee member? Anyone? Thank you. Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Approve as substitute. I'm trying to rush. Approve as substitute. May I have a motion? Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Now motion carries. Thank you, and we are adjourned. Wow.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.